Before the sun had even climbed over Manhattan, the studio lights were already blazing. America's favorite morning show was live. Coffee cups clinking, cameras rolling, smiles rehearsed. Everything looked picture perfect, but behind that polished charm, something volatile was waiting to spark. Because that Tuesday morning, Hollywood royalty, Samuel L. Jackson, took his seat across from Michael Strahan. And what happened next would leave the nation speechless. For decades, Samuel had been the embodiment of cool under pressure, the unflinching presence, the voice that could silence a room. But even legends have limits. He was there for one reason, to talk about his latest film. 15 minutes of light banter, a few laughs, a polite plug. That was the plan. Instead, those 15 minutes imploded in 38 seconds. It started with a smile, the easy rhythm of morning television. Michael Strahan leaning in, charm on full display, his tone casual, his grin disarming. Then came the question, a single line, simple on the surface, but laced with something colder beneath. Sam, at your age, how much longer can you really keep doing those wild action roles? The air changed. You could feel it. That invisible shift only live television can capture. Laughter died in throats. Cameras caught the flicker in Samuel's eyes. The split-second calculation between restraint and reaction. He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached his eyes. What followed was not just an interview gone wrong. It was a collision between dignity and ego, between respect and arrogance. Broadcast live to millions. And before the first commercial break could roll, Samuel L. Jackson would do what few ever dared to do on live television. He would walk away. But to understand why that moment erupted, to see how 38 seconds shattered the illusion of civility, we have to rewind, back to the seconds before the silence, back to the moment respect began to unravel, and that's where our story truly begins. The morning had started like any other, producers buzzing through earpieces, makeup artists dabbing foreheads, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. Good morning, America. The show America trusted to start its day with smiles and sunshine, a place where chaos never leaked on camera, until that day. Samuel L. Jackson arrived early. Dark suit, crisp tie, the kind of quiet authority that didn't need an introduction. He'd done this routine 1,000 times. The talk show circuit, the polite chatter, the familiar questions about scripts and co-stars. He was calm, focused, a man whose career had spanned generations. But behind that calm, there was fatigue. The kind that comes from years of being both admired and underestimated. Across the set, Michael Strahan stood at the desk, all charm and ease. The golden boy of morning TV. Ex-athlete turned crowd favorite. He had a grin that could melt ice and a confidence that made producers trust him with any guest. But that morning something was different. A glint of restlessness, a hint of ego beneath the friendliness. The cameras weren't rolling yet, but the energy was already shifting. Robin Roberts adjusted her notes beside them. George Stephanopoulos fine-tuned his lines. It was business as usual, except from the control booth, one producer would later say, the air felt strange that morning, like static before lightning. The clock ticked closer to 8 a.m. Crew members whispered final cues. Everyone smiled. Everyone pretended the tension wasn't there. Then came the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Good morning, America. Strahan's voice boomed across the studio. The audience clapped on cue. Laughter filled the room, and Samuel returned the smile. Practiced, polite, perfect. A few light questions first. A joke about his movie. A compliment about his legendary energy. Everything smooth, effortless. And then, like a sudden drop in pressure before a storm, Strahan leaned in. Sam, at your age, how much longer can you really keep doing those wild action roles? It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel, but it was loaded. A microsecond of silence filled the studio. The kind that feels eternal when millions are watching. You could see it. The flicker behind Samuel's eyes. Not anger, just recognition. He'd been here before. Disguised insults under smiles. Backhanded questions framed as flattery. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slide. From that single question, the entire room began to tilt. Slowly, then all at once. The tension invisible, yet crushing. The kind of moment where the wrong word can detonate everything. The stage looked perfect. The lights gleamed. But something deeper was about to snap. Because this wasn't just about age. It was about respect. And that's the one thing Samuel L. Jackson would never compromise. What happened next would turn that studio into a silent battlefield and redefine what it meant to stand your ground on live television. At first, the air barely moved. A nervous laugh from somewhere in the audience. A forced grin from Strahan. But that tiny spark, that single offhand question, had already set the fuse. Samuel's eyes didn't flinch. He smiled. But it was the kind of smile that hides 1,000 thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. At my age, Michael, I didn't realize there was an expiration date on passion. It was sharp, effortless, a counterpunch wrapped in composure. The crowd chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to. Even the crew behind the cameras froze. But Strahan didn't take the cue to step back. Instead, he leaned in further as if he couldn't resist poking the bear. No, I mean it, Sam. You've had an amazing run, but at some point, don't you think it's time to slow down? Maybe pass the torch. The words hung there like smoke. Robin Roberts shifted in her seat. George Stephanopoulos looked down at his notes, pretending to read. Even the teleprompter operator hesitated, sensing something was off script. Samuel exhaled slowly, fingers tapping once against his knee. Then he looked straight at Strahan. Michael, I've spent 40 years doing what I love. I didn't get here by slowing down when people told me to. The crowd murmured, soft but growing, the kind of reaction that carries both awe and discomfort. Strahan laughed, that polished TV laugh meant to reset the mood, but it came out hollow. Hey, I'm just keeping it real. You've been in the game forever, man. People wonder if you're ready to let the new guys take over. The temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a test. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. He just let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then, in a voice smooth as ice, I think respect is something that doesn't come with an age limit either. That line hit like thunder. A few quiet gasps from the audience. Robin's eyes darted toward the control booth, as if asking, are we cutting to commercial yet? But no one moved. The moment was live, raw, unstoppable. Strahan chuckled again, trying to play it off. Come on, Sam, don't take it personal. You know how this show works. Yeah, Samuel replied softly. I do. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just stillness. That dangerous, fragile stillness before everything breaks. Viewers at home couldn't see it, but the energy on set had shifted completely. Crew members avoided eye contact. Robin's hands clenched in her lap. Even the studio lights seemed to hum louder, like they sensed what was coming. Samuel leaned forward, his voice a measured whisper. You want to ask about the movie, Michael, or you want to talk about me? It was a challenge, quiet, controlled, and lethal. And for a heartbeat, Strahan didn't answer. He smiled, but his eyes betrayed irritation. I'm just asking questions, Sam. That's what I do. Then maybe, Samuel said, ask better ones. The audience reacted, and a few stunned laughs, a few uneasy murmurs. And in that moment, the mask of morning television cracked wide open. Behind the glass, the producers whispered frantically, cut to break, stay live. What do we do? But no one dared interrupt, because something bigger than ratings was unfolding. Something real, a rare moment when Hollywood's smooth machinery, image, charm, PR polish, stopped spinning, and the truth walked in uninvited. And in that truth, two men stood on opposite sides of one invisible line. One defending his dignity, the other his pride. Neither willing to back down, and that's when the unthinkable happened. The tension was invisible, but it filled every corner of the studio. It was the kind of quiet that hums, the kind that presses against your chest. Samuel sat back in his chair, his gaze locked on Michael. Not angry, not defensive, just steady, controlled. The kind of silence that says, choose your next words carefully. Strahan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come on, Sam. You know I'm just teasing. Don't be so serious. The crowd gave a nervous laugh, uncertain which man to side with. And that's when Samuel's smile vanished completely. I've done this a long time, Michael, he said. Long enough to know when teasing stops being humor and starts being disrespect. The energy shifted, the room, the air, the pulse of the show, everything froze. Robin Roberts leaned forward softly. Gentlemen, but Michael talked right over her. No disrespect, Sam. I just think maybe you're being a little sensitive. The word hit like a slap. Sensitive. The one word every strong man is told when he finally stands up for himself. Samuel leaned in slightly, voice calm but razor sharp. Sensitive? He repeated. You question my ability, my relevance, and my worth on live television, and when I respond, I'm sensitive? The silence after that line wasn't empty. It was electric. Everyone in the room knew it. This was no longer entertainment. This was confrontation. In the control booth, a producer whispered, "Cut to commercial," but no one did, because no one could look away. Michael shrugged, still trying to claw back control. "Look, man, I'm just being honest. People talk about it. You've been around forever. Maybe it's time for some new faces to take the spotlight." Samuel didn't blink. His reply was soft, but it sliced through every layer of false charm. "You think longevity is a flaw, Michael? You think consistency should be punished?" Strahan hesitated, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Hey, I'm just saying what people think. Don't shoot the messenger." And that's when Samuel stood up. Slowly, deliberately. The movement was quiet, but it was final. The kind of motion that shifts the entire atmosphere without a sound. "Let me tell you something," he said. "Real journalists ask questions to understand, not to provoke." He reached for his mic, unclipping it with a soft metallic click. That sound, barely audible, felt louder than any argument. He set the mic down gently on the coffee table. The camera zoomed in without meaning to. It was history in motion. "Real journalists don't ambush their guests," he said evenly. "They don't hide ego behind curiosity. They don't dress arrogance as honesty." The audience gasped. Robin's hand covered her mouth. George Stephanopoulos looked like he'd seen a car crash happen in slow motion. Michael sat frozen, caught between embarrassment and disbelief. The red light of the live camera blinked. Millions of people watching, witnessing a man reclaim his dignity, one breath at a time. Samuel adjusted his jacket, took one final look at the host, and said the line that would echo across social media for weeks. "I respect myself too much to stay where I'm not respected." Then, without hurry, he turned toward the exit. Every step deliberate, every heartbeat counted. The audience began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder. Applause that didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like solidarity. Michael tried to laugh it off. "Oh, sure. Walk away, Sam. Real mature." But his voice cracked. The mask had slipped, and everyone could hear it. Samuel didn't turn around. He didn't need to, because in that silence, amid the applause and the disbelief, he'd already said everything that needed saying. And when those studio doors closed behind him, the chaos was only just beginning. The doors closed behind him. And with that single deliberate step, Samuel L. Jackson vanished from live television. Inside the studio, the silence was deafening. The cameras kept rolling. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to clap or gasp. Even the lights seemed to dim. Michael Strahan stared at the empty chair across from him, the microphone still resting there like evidence of a crime. Robin Roberts broke first. "Michael," she said quietly, "you need to stop talking." Her tone wasn't angry. It was wounded. George Stephanopoulos leaned toward the control booth, his voice barely a whisper. "Cut to commercial." But the producers hesitated, because history was happening right there, in real time, and nobody wanted to miss it. When the screen finally faded to black, chaos erupted behind it. Producers shouting into headsets, assistants sprinting between hallways, executives already on phones with publicists and lawyers. "What the hell just happened?" someone yelled. "He walked out," another answered, as if those words could ever explain enough. Down the corridor, Samuel was calm. No anger, no panic, just silence. His team met him halfway, breathless, stunned. "Sam, what happened in there?" He didn't look back. He didn't need to. "Nothing," he said. "I just decided I'm not giving anyone the right to disrespect me on national television." Back in the studio, Michael was unraveling. He tried to joke it off, but the laughter never came. Robin wouldn't look at him. George flipped his cue cards face down. The red light blinked again. They were live. Robin took a deep breath. "As you just saw," she began carefully, "we had an unexpected moment on our program this morning." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most respected figures in this industry, and this morning he didn't receive that respect. Viewers felt it, a rare honesty on live television, the kind that cuts through the gloss and leaves a scar." By the time the show ended, clips were already flooding the internet. 38 seconds that spread like wildfire. Hashtags, debates, think pieces, the digital storm had begun. Respect Samuel Jackson, walk with Sam, GM of Chaos. Millions of people took sides. Some defended Michael, He was just doing his job. Others called it what it was. Disrespect in a suit and tie. Within hours, every platform had frozen that moment in time. Samuel's calm, his silence, his walk-off. The image of dignity standing tall in the face of ego. Inside ABC's headquarters, panic turned to damage control. Conference calls, emergency statements, a PR crisis disguised as a misunderstanding. One executive reportedly said, "The brand's on fire, and we lit the match ourselves." Robin stayed late that night, sitting alone in her dressing room. The makeup lights buzzed softly, reflecting off tear-streaked mascara. She whispered to herself, "He handled that better than any of us did." Down the hall, Michael's door stayed closed. Inside, the man who'd built his career on charm now sat alone, his reflection staring back at him from a mirror that didn't blink. "What did I do wrong?" he muttered, but deep down, he already knew. Meanwhile, across the city, Samuel was silent. No interviews, no statements. He didn't need to speak. The footage spoke for him. People called it the walk heard around the world. But it wasn't about walking away. It was about standing firm, standing for every artist who's been mocked behind a smile, for every professional told they're too old, too sensitive, or too outspoken. It was about reminding the world that respect isn't optional. In the following days, GMA opened each broadcast with a slightly different tone. Less laughter, more restraint. The air, once filled with effortless banter, now carried the weight of what had been lost and what had been exposed. Michael issued a public apology. It was short, polished, corporate, but America had already made up its mind. As for Samuel, he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The clip replayed across talk shows, newsrooms, and college classrooms. Analysts slowed it down frame by frame. The jaw tightening, the micro pause before the mic drop, the controlled walk away. They called it a masterclass in grace under fire, a lesson in self-respect, a moment where silence became the loudest sound on television. Weeks later, when asked about it in a brief red carpet interview, Samuel smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes you don't need to argue, you just need to leave." And just like that, he walked on, still calm, still composed, still Samuel L. Jackson, because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is not shout or fight or prove a point. It's to walk away and then let the world watch in silence. That morning wasn't just television, it was a mirror, held up to power, ego, and grace. And in those 38 seconds, Samuel L. Jackson reminded us all of one simple truth. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you refuse to live without. What do you think? Was Samuel right to walk away? Was it self-respect or a step too far? Let's talk about it in the comments below. And if you believe in standing your ground, no matter the stage, hit that like button, subscribe, and join us next time for another story where truth meets spotlight. Because sometimes the real drama isn't in the movies. It's live, unscripted, and impossible to forget.